India became the voice of the global south. India also became a voice for the African nations. The Middle East corridor is still the reckoning. Now, what is happening essentially is that each country which was supposed to make its own infrastructure is continuing to make one. One of the key reasons why Iranian proxy Hamas did the terror strikes was to also scuttle the deal, which ultimately would have ended up in some sort of a detente between Saudi Arabia and Israel. Houthi attacks, which are taking place currently, they are being held at bay by not only with the US-led coalition, with the Italian, Spanish, French ships, and India is playing a huge role in this. China has agreed to allow patrolling of these places by Indian troops as before, which is
Okay.
very significant because in that way, what you do is you actually restore what is called status quo ante. US will give India the technologies that are required to make this engine work, and this can be actually used to actually develop your own indigenous capabilities. Countries like Indonesia, countries like Malaysia, tomorrow Philippines, Bangladesh, anybody, if they want submarines, which is diesel attack submarines, India will be able to export them to.
You're watching Hindustan Times Point Blank with me, Aditi Prasad, and the HT Executive Editor Shishir Gupta. Now, this one is a special edition because it's the year end. But it's not just the end of another year, it's the end of a year marked with senseless conflicts, reckless wars all around the world. And in the middle of this global churn and challenges, there has been a rising yet pragmatic India, one which has not been afraid to wear its self interest on its sleeves. And we're going to talk about the five big geopolitical wins that India has had in this last 1 year. And I'm going to hand over to Shishir to start off what he thinks is the biggest one of them all.
Namaskar. Aditi, the biggest geopolitical win in 2023 is actually something which is no marks for guessing, which is India successfully hosting the G20 summit. Not only the hosting of the G20 summit, getting all the leaders with disparate views on a single platform, issuing a statement, but bigger than that was what was important was that India became the voice of the global south. India also became a voice for the African nations because for the first time on India's proposal, African Union was made a member of the G20 on a permanent basis. Now, the biggest point in this was putting the voice of the global south, a global south which was hit by COVID, a global south which was hit by the various wars, particularly the Ukraine war, and now
Hmm.
you have the Israel war in Gaza. So basically, what was there was that India could actually champion the voice of the south, also bring across a developmental agenda, a green agenda, and to really emphasize on the way to take the global, the entire community forward by saying that it was Vasudev Kutumbakam, a family where everybody seeks for a better future and for prosperity.
You talked about G20, and the second biggest thing rather, which came out of the G20, apart from the joint communication that you talked about, and getting the entire world leaders on one stage, was the the IMEC, or the India Middle East Economic Corridor. That was a huge development, a huge announcement coming from the G20 forum. Uh, However, I think a month into the announcement, the war in Israel broke out, and the project seemingly is now stalled.
Well, to my mind, second most important geopolitical win for India was the Middle East Economic Corridor and is the Middle East Economic Corridor. Now, we all know that the war on Gaza, which was sparked off by a Hamas terrorist attack on South Israel, has actually, drawn curtains on the Middle East Economic Corridor. But that is not the case. To my mind, what is happening very clearly is that the Middle East corridor is still the reckoning. Now, what is happening essentially is that each country which was supposed to make its own infrastructure is continuing to make one, and the last mile has to be worked out. But let me just go back to the entire thing once again. See, what is Middle East Economic Corridor? It is basically goods from India, from Mundra port, going to Fujairah port in UAE. From Fujairah port, they take via trucks or via railroad to Saudi Arabia, and then they push towards Jordan, and the ultimate destination was Haifa port in Israel. Now, from there, the goods were supposed to be transported to from Marseille all the way up to Italy and to various other ports in Mediterranean. Now, what the war did was that it has actually cast a huge shadow on the project, because it will be very difficult for Middle East nations, for the Arab countries to reconcile with having Haifa as the final port of destination
Hmm.
before they reach the European ports. Now, in that scenario, there is a possibility that is being looked at is that these goods go from Jordan via Turkey and then go to the European seaports. But let me also tell you something very important. Everybody knows that one of the key reasons why Iranian proxy Hamas did the terror strikes was to also scuttle the deal, which ultimately would have ended up in some sort of a detente between Saudi Arabia and Israel, a working detente between Saudi Arabia and Israel, with UAE also on the same boat. Now, that may be so. The project may be a little bit delayed, but to my mind, and whatever I've learned of it at the highest level, is that everybody is continuing with its own project, and this entire thing will come to fruition pretty soon. Remember, this project was launched by Prime Minister Narendra Modi, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, and the President of UAE, Mohammed bin Zayed. It was only later it was all stitched up with the US support and with the Israeli support. So, to my mind, and thankfully so, the project is very well on course and should come to fruition soon.
Just a question on on this project, and then we'll go to the third big geopolitical win, which is about the Houthi attacks in the Red Sea.
Yes,
This project becomes all the more important given what's happening there, doesn't it?
absolutely. Absolutely, it does. But the thing is that the Houthi attacks, which are taking place currently, they are being held at bay by not only with the US-led coalition, with the Italian, Spanish, French ships, and India is playing a huge role in this. Currently, India has got 5 frontline destroyers in Arabian Sea to ensure to deter such attacks. Now, Houthi attacks will continue because they are playing the game on part of Iran to somehow pressurize the global community to ask Israel to call off the war in Gaza. But the way
Right.
things are, Israel will go for total demilitarization of Gaza because they have no other options left.
Moving on, let's come on that the Israel war and the fallout being what it is. The fact remains that you're saying that in the highest echelons of the Indian government and the respective governments in Saudi and
Yes.
the UAE, the project is very
Yes.
well on course. Right. Let's move on to the third big geopolitical win for India in the year 2023 in your mind.
Okay, so the third one, which is the least talked about, but is one of the most important developments as far as India is concerned. What has happened is that you may recall that the Chinese PLA had transgressed uh, in East Ladakh on May 5, 2020. Now, after that, there was a full fledged blowout in Galwan on June 15, 2020, where India lost troops and China also lost troops. Now, after that, there have been a significant number of dialogues, 20 dialogues, where India and China are trying to work out a solution as to what is to be done about it. But in the meantime, what has happened is that we have ended up creating buffer zones all along the LAC where neither side can patrol. Now, this is Galwan, this is Pagongso, and this is Gogra Hot Springs. Now, all this was continuing while India was maintaining that, listen, there cannot be any normalcy till such time we are allowed to patrol. You cannot have a buffer zone as a final solution. Now, these talks were continuing till the 17th or the 18th round of the senior military commanders dialogue. Chinese were not even willing to listen. But to my understanding, in the last dialogue, which is the 20th dialogue, which took place on October 11th, China has agreed to allow patrolling of these places by Indian troops as before, which is
Okay.
very significant because in that way, what you do is you actually restore what is called status quo ante prior to May 5, 2020. So the patrolling parameters are being worked out. There no longer will be buffer zones. India will continue to patrol what is called the patrolling limits in East Ladakh, which is in 1976, the cabinet secretary had drawn 65 patrolling points in East Ladakh. And these patrolling points, the Indian Army will be able to patrol. And that includes Depsang as well as Demchok.
Wow.
But
So that's that's
there
that's
is
a
a
pretty that's a pretty big concession by the Chinese because they were very hard and fast on this.
Well, my understanding is that India has made it very clear that the road towards normalization, diplomatic normalization with China only goes through East Ladakh. So it's not a concession. Basically, this was a requirement for the ties to get normal or go back to what they were. But let me
Right.
tell you one final thing. With China, nothing happens till it's done. So let's wait and watch. But my understanding is this is the way to go.
All right. So we've talked about the Middle East, we've talked about uh, China, and I have a feeling is that the fourth big geopolitical win that we're going to talk about is about the India-US relations. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Absolutely. Absolutely spot on. So the biggest achievement of the India-US relations, I mean, beyond this nonsense about, Pannu this or Pannu that, is the initiative on critical emerging technologies. Now, this was drawn up by the Indian National Security Advisor Ajit Doval with his US counterpart Jake Sullivan on January 31st, 2023. Now, it's a longish document that talks about India US cooperation on quantum computing, talks about 6G, talks about various other things, space, everything. But the critical part was the 100% transfer of technology of the GE414 engine to India, which essentially means that US General Electric will transfer 100% technology that will allow India to make G414 engines that will power your LCA Mark II, which is going to be the backbone of the Indian Air Force. Let me tell you why this is important. Even now, the Chinese do not have a functioning engine. They are trying to develop what is called WS-15, but that has not come to fore. Even the Chinese use the Russian engines on TOT basis. Now, why this becomes important is because in US will give India the technologies that are required to make this engine work, and this can be actually used to actually develop your own indigenous capabilities. For instance, the hot engine technology, for instance, the crystal technology. So this was a huge takeaway, and the US Congress has approved of it. It's only a matter of time where GE joins with HAL to produce the G414 engine, which will ensure that India's Air Force flies at the highest level and at the optimum level.
That sounds very promising for times to come. And let's move on to the fifth geopolitical win, as per you.
The fifth one, which was again goes on to the defense sector, but it's a very critical part of it, is what happened when Prime Minister Narendra Modi had gone on July 14 to attend the Bastille Day parade at the invitation of French President Emmanuel Macron. You must understand that Emmanuel Macron is going to be our chief guest for the Republic Day of 2024. Now, in that, there was two MOUs were signed. One was an MOU between Naval Group, French Naval Group, and the GRSC Kolkata. Second was a MOU between Naval Group and the Mazagon Dockyards Limited. Now, this MOU allowed both sides to develop, manufacture, design surface combatants as far as GRSC Kolkata was concerned, and submarines in MDL, which will be allowed to export to third countries. It's a huge development. Now, what essentially it means is that tomorrow, if Indonesia is going to buy Scorpion submarines, these submarines will be manufactured in MDL. If tomorrow somebody is going to buy a destroyer, it is going to be from GRSC Kolkata. So essentially, India will develop its own machine tool capabilities, its design capabilities, and its workforce will have continuous orders to work on. And right now, you have MDL has at least 8 bays to develop, 11 bays, if I'm not mistaken, to manufacture to actually construct submarines. Now, all these positions, you'll have a huge order because countries like Indonesia, countries like Malaysia, tomorrow Philippines, Bangladesh, anybody, if they want submarines, which is diesel attack submarines, India will be able to export them to.
That's a huge development, especially in an environment where Make in India and defense is something that the government has been promoting and boosting in a huge way.
You must understand that India this year has crossed defense exports to the tune of 17,000 crores. Its total revenues have crossed about a lakh crores. So this is the key or the cornerstone of the Atmanirbhar Bharat.
Got you. And I think with that, I think those are the five big geopolitical wins. Thank you for highlighting them for us. Also, there is, I mean, you can't but help but notice the renewed respect in the Western nations for India's stance on the Russia-Ukraine war and how it wore self-interest, India's own self-interest, how India wore its self-interest on its sleeves and said, no, we will continue to buy oil from Russia. And many other nations, developing nations, sort of followed suit after India put down its foot on that front, and which was accepted by Western economies moving later on. But thank you so much for sharing those with us. And let's hope 2024 will be an even more exciting year. It definitely promises to be exciting. There are 40 elections scheduled around the world, and and of course there is the big Indian election itself with the India bloc on one side and the Narendra Modi popularity factor on the other side. But we'll please stay tuned to Hindustan Times viewers. We will keep coming back to you with more insights as we go along the new year. Thank you.